Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Cult and Overcoming. My guest today is someone that grew up in a very controlling Christian atmosphere. He became really involved in the praise and worship team within that community. And years down the line, ended up joining a Christian band and traveled all over the country. And soon realized he was questioning some of his faith and beliefs and started realizing the actual realness of what he grew up in and everything. So I just want to go ahead and welcome Jon, and thank you so much for doing this and joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. This is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm excited to catch up. I've known you for about 10 years. I actually met you about 2 years after I left the cult I grew up in. And I think we kind of just connected on a level of both being raised in church and the Christian world and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just get started. We've been talking a little bit over the phone for the past month about some of this stuff. And it is crazy to hear the way that you talk now about Christianity and faith and beliefs versus back then. It's really different. And we'll get into all of that. But why don't we go ahead and start with the kind of church that you grew up in and what denomination it was and everything. You don't have to say the name of it if you don't want to. I tell people you don't have to say the name of like churches or actual people. So just kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I was born in 85, so I'm 37 now, but back in the 80s, there was this kind of like hellfire, brimstone, end times prophecies, and he's coming back soon, and I wish we'd all been ready, and that whole thing. And I went to kind of like, I guess back then it wasn't really non-denominational, but it was like that kind of very charismatic, just very, very legalistic Christianity. I mean, like the first thing I think of is like the sanctuary had those big flags with like the ornate wordings on it, Lamb of God and Tribe of Judah, and like all these King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and it wasn't like there was a ton of like abuse going on in terms of like physical stuff. I mean, there was some stuff that came out later on that was like, yeah, that wouldn't fly these days. Mm-hmm. But the I guess denomination was, I don't know, I guess it was more of like a non-denominational type situation. But I think more closer to like the Southern Baptist. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of what it was. But back in the 80s, that's kind of almost every church was very similar. They were preaching that same kind. I mean, it was like the David Koresh era. So you've got a lot of that, he's coming back soon, you better be ready and don't, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's kind of the style of church it was.
You also went to school there, right?
Yeah. So my whole family, so I have two brothers and one sister. And my mom taught at the school, and we went to private school there as well. Probably for the first through fourth grade, things were kind of, typical like Christian school, private school thing. And then like fifth and sixth grade, it got kind of weird where there was a lot of that Pensacola, Florida revival stuff happening. And so there would be more sanctuary prayer time than there would be like actually learning. And so I really struggled in like sixth and seventh grade going into public school. It was like a whole nother world to me. But yeah, we went to school there as well.
What age did you transfer from that to public school?
I think I was in the middle of sixth grade. I transferred to public, and it was a total culture shock. Yeah. I mean, we lived in this little Christian bubble. You know what I mean? Like the world is, the world's after you, and don't sin, and don't do anything the world does. And they teach you to kind of like all the outsiders from within your community. If anyone on the outside, everyone on the outside is like bad and sinful and all that other stuff. Don't be of the world. And so, but I had some interesting things happen in that like transition. And so it was like one thing after another. But I just remember like leaving the private school. We left because there was a lot of just weird stuff happening within the church, and we found like I don't want to say too much because I don't know exactly how much of the stuff that I've heard was true, but I just know that there was a lot of really inappropriate stuff happening with the finances and relationships, and there was like some adultery going on and all that kind of stuff. I mean,
why is it always like adultery and then financial stuff that comes out?
well, money and sex. I mean, I think
Yeah,
those are the two most powerful, things, assets on the planet, I guess. I mean, for the most part, I would say that. I mean, it's more so those are just the two most tempting things, unfortunately. And anytime there's human beings involved, there's money and there's sex.
for sure. I mean, that's exactly what we kind of dealt with, even like the schooling aspect that you were saying. We all homeschooled, but within that community, everybody homeschooled, but you still weren't learning that much. It was
Yeah.
just like your mom teaching you. And then, I mean, they're doing the best they can and everything, but they're not teachers, like professional teachers. And nothing against homeschooling. And hey, if you want to homeschool your kids, more power to you. It's just, we weren't really getting the full education that we needed.
We did homeschooling for a little while too. It was like a Becca, I think, was the
Yes.
curriculum.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yes, we did that. Yeah.
A Becca. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so funny. Yeah, for sure. And we had to, I remember it was a lot of schooling yourself. So because we traveled, I think I told you somewhat about what we came from and everything, but we traveled a lot. And it was during a lot of our teenage years when like schooling was the most important. And you had to do it yourself. You had to like be on top of it yourself. And most like, I feel like me and maybe one other person were some of the only girls that actually did it. Everybody else like was slack off or wouldn't do it till they got back.
Yeah.
Of course, you're a teenager. You want to like, you're out on the road. You
Sure.
want to be doing school. And then on top of it, everybody cheated. You had the answer key right. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to
Yep.
cheat. Anyways, it's just interesting how when you're in this kind of environment, whether it's cult-like vibe or in the Christian denominational kind of sect, the schooling aspect, I feel like can sometimes suffer a little bit and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think, specifically in the 80s and 90s, there was nothing more important than like your salvation.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, here's, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but like, this is the type of stuff that would happen in our classrooms. So I remember this girl, I'm not going to say her name, but she was like tapping her foot on the floor, right? And her foot was she was just tapping and tapping and tapping. And I don't know what was wrong with her. She was like super emotional. I just remember looking over and she looked really distressed. And my teacher at the time was like this very zealous, overly spiritual, lady. And I remember she looked over at this girl and was like, all right, class, we're all going to the sanctuary. And so she was like interpreting the girl's foot, if I remember, as like a spiritual manifestation of God. And we all would just go to the sanctuary. So I'm in the middle of trying to learn this curriculum, and we're going to the sanctuary to pray. And that would happen a bunch of different times, you know what I mean? And so I definitely felt, very distracted by that type of stuff. And then that in turn made it harder for me going into public school. Cause I was like, they were teaching me stuff I'd never even seen, you know what I mean?
For sure. Does y'all ever, I was so funny. I was just listening to a podcast earlier on Joe Rogan, and they were talking about spanking. And, in our day and age of growing up, your ass got whipped. I talked about this a little bit, but we got spanked with everything. Belt, spoon, switch, just whatever it may be. And I remember this was actually before we got to the cult. Me and my sister, we went to a Christian private school in Wichita Falls. But as a little kid, I had to be 5 or 6. And I still have this memory. It's a Christian school atmosphere. I got in trouble, and I don't remember why I got in trouble, when I had to go to the principal's office, and she bent me over and spanked me, gave me this huge paddle, gave me a couple swats. Back then it was just normal. And I think my parents were just, I don't even remember, it was so long ago. Did anything like that happen there where?
Oh yeah. No, that was very common. And looking back now, it's like how inappropriate was how inappropriate was that for like grown men to spank little girls or little boys? You're not my dad, for one. And it's like, I've got nieces and nephews. I've got a niece and a bunch of nephews, and I look at them now and I'm like, man, I could never touch them. I would never in a million years touch my nephew, my nephews or my niece. I could never lay a hand on them. And, such an innocent little kid. 10 years or younger. These kids are getting popped. It's like, I think everybody up and even until high school was getting pops, but there were definitely some stories. I for sure got popped for sure many times, but there were some stories of like physical, I want to say there was one instance where the pastor's wife or the pastor was like pinching one of the students, like literally pinching them. I want to say it was like their lips or something like that too, like pinching their lips and telling them to shut up and stuff. I don't know exactly if it was that a specific church, but I remember hearing some stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely, that stuff happened for sure.
Yeah, and it was just so common, in that day and age, especially. And a lot of parents spanked back then. I don't know if it was just their generation, their parents did that as well, so they did that to us. But nowadays, you cannot do that anymore.
Well, think about this for a second. Like, how could a parent turn over disciplinary action to like the pastor? Like, who are you? You know what I mean? Like, and for sure that couldn't get away. Like, you would not be able to get away with that now. But growing up in the 80s and having some grown man bend you over and take his hand or a paddle or whatever it is and give you pops because you spoke out of turn or you ate a piece of bubble gum or something really dumb, just doesn't make sense. And then for, just like many cults, the parents essentially, co-sign on this thing where they're like, well, you're in trouble. I remember seeing like kids, parents knowing that their son or daughter's about to get pops, and they would be like, sorry, it's like, what? Pretty wild.
Jeez, man. Well, it's kind of good to know it wasn't just where I grew up. So
yeah,
as bad as it sounds, we weren't the only ones. Now looking back, did you notice anything else growing up in that kind of environment that was kind of strange or weird?
Well, again, I need to make sure the things I say are, as accurate as they could be. There was a lot of like, the speaking in tongues and, there was some weird stuff going on. I don't even know if I want to say it because I just, I don't remember anything like truly sinister, you know what I mean? But for me, I know that there was some like weird spiritual stuff going on between like two ladies at one point in the middle of a service. And like, I grew up in all that, what is that? The gifts of the spirit and all those other things. And I just remember seeing people speak in tongues and I didn't understand it. I really didn't. And my teacher at the time was like, John, do you want to speak in tongues? And I'm like, I mean, sure, it's like what everybody does. And she's like, okay, you're going to pray this prayer with me. And as soon as you're done praying, whatever comes out of your mouth is your language to God. And
Wow.
I just remembered hearing somebody else speak in tongues. And so I just shut up, whatever. I just kind of like mimicked what they did. And I remember for years, they would be praying and I would be underneath my breath speaking in tongues because I thought that's what you did. And there was power in what I was doing. And in hindsight, I realized like how ludicrous that all that stuff was. But there was another moment, and this specific teacher I had a liking. Like she took a liking to me. She really saw a lot in me, and she felt like I was anointed. And I remember there was one day in particular, me and one of my good friends, we were in the sanctuary. It was another one of those days where they pulled everybody into the sanctuary and we're all going to pray. We're going to bring the whole school in here and we're going to pray. And, there's a revival happening and all this stuff. And I remember going in there and my buddy was crying. And so then I started crying and everybody else is crying. We're all on the altar, crying, everyone's crying. And my teacher comes up and she says, do you know why you're crying? And I said, no, I don't. And she said, well, you're an interceder. You're crying out for the lost. And that's why, And I think that was a turning point for me where I was kind of told like, you're a little soldier, and although it's like, it's a nice gesture, it's kind of a bad thing for someone like myself who I'm an overachiever and I'm kind of OCD and I'm a type A. I love creating and doing things and getting things done and all that stuff. But from there, the weird stuff, the weirdest thing I experienced was back in the 80s, there was these movies called A Thief in the Night. And it was these end times prophecies left behind type series.
Yeah.
And I remember them like rolling one of those TVs in on the cart thing and putting these videos on in like our lunchroom. And it's this video of, I don't remember the whole thing, but I remember there's there's a couple scenes in particular I remember. One was like this family trying to go get food at the grocery store, but because they didn't have the mark of the beast on their hand or on the forehead, which was back then was a tattoo, they couldn't buy any food or gas or anything. So they're starving. And in the next scene, the only other scene I really remember was there's a guillotine and there's like two little boys and their mom, I think. And the little boys are given balloons to like comfort them. And their mom is put on a guillotine and asked to denounce Christ. Like you either say God's not real and you can live, or we're going to cut your head off. And she basically became a martyr. And the scene like goes from the little boys holding the balloon and handing it to their mom to comfort her to you hear the guillotine chop and then the balloons flying off, in the sky. So talk about weird. In hindsight, looking back, that's pretty freaking messed up for like a little kid. And at the time I'm like, I want to say I was like 5 or 6 watching this video where I'm basically being indoctrinated with, at some point, these bad people are going to capture you. You're going to be forced to either say God's not real and you don't believe in Jesus and you can live, then you're going to go to hell for doing that. Because you got to take the mark of the beast, and the Bible says you take the mark, you're going to hell, blah, blah, blah. And or you can get your head cut off and go to heaven, So here I am, this 6, 7-year-old kid having to decide. I would always have this. From probably 6 to like my early 30s, I literally lived in this like constant fear of they're coming. Jesus is going to come back soon, but nobody knows the time or the hour. Nobody knows when. So I better have my life right, and I can't sin. And if I sin, then I'm going to go to hell. And I better repent right now, because then my sin jar will go down to 0 again. And, you know, you have this constant fear. And I think that was like a PTSD thing for me, where I was just really screwed up for a long time, where a lot of my life decisions were based on that one moment in my life. And sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but that was, like, I would say, the most detrimental of things, which was being kind of told, like, at some point you're going to have to make this decision. You're either going to get your head cut off, or you're going to stay on earth and live in this, you know, peril, you know, this terrible time to be alive. But yeah, that, you know, when you think about that, I mean, imagine telling some little 5-year-old kid now, you know, there's this God in heaven and he loves you, but, you know, you might have to get your head cut off to go see him. You know what I mean?
For sure. I remember that movie very clearly, that part that you're talking about. I may have been a little bit older when I saw it, but I remember they were showing those movies at the cult we were at. So I can imagine being a little kid, because anything adults tell you or what you see, you think it's reality, truth. As a 30-year-old, did you honestly still believe that was the reality of what was going to happen?
No, it wasn't so much that. You know, a lot of times when you go through trauma as a little kid, it kind of gets put in a folder and then just kind of way in the back of your mind. And what started this whole journey for me was, I was watching, like, I was on Facebook scrolling or something, and I saw this like crazy looking goth dude, and I think he was a PK, little pastor's kid, and he was talking about religious trauma, and I was like, well, let me click on this, and I listened to him talk, and he's talking about my story, literally the same exact thing, and I was like, man, this is like, I identify so much with this. And so I researched it a little more, and I found this lady, don't remember her name, but she kind of coined the phrase religious trauma syndrome. And as I heard her speak, I was like, this is me 100%. And it was like all these memories started coming up where I totally had forgotten, or just kind of out of sight of the mind. I kind of started to kind of decode this stuff the beginning of this year. And so before we move further, I kind of want to just briefly touch on kind of one of the reasons why I even got to this place where I'm at now, which is like this, you know, what they call deconstruction and all that.
Okay, let's just go back real quick, because going into what you're going to talk about is going to lead to, so you are a musician, songwriter, or were, I don't know if you have current stuff going on now or in the future, but you were really good at what you do, by the way. But you got really involved in the praise and worship part of the community that you were at, but then within other churches as well. So you were with really in that music world and everything. Do you want to kind of explain some of that? I mean, you said you were 12 or 13 when you started, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started playing guitar at like 6 years old. I mean, I got like a Sears catalog guitar from my grandmother when I was really young, and I just loved it. I love playing music and guitar, and I come from kind of a lineage of musicians. My mom was a singer, my dad's a singer songwriter, and after we left the church that I kind of went to private school in and kind of grew up in, I started getting involved in kind of like youth groups, I guess. And so there was another church I was involved in, and was on the youth group there, and was there for several years. And that's kind of how I got started, I guess, in music ministry. And then it just kind of evolved from there, you know, where I was like asked to come sing, and, you know, and then I had like this little rock band I was in that wasn't Christian, but it kind of had its like.
Was that when I met you?
No, this was, I was like 13 or 14 when I first joined that band. Okay. Yeah, and all the other guys were like 20. They were older than me, but I was just kind of an advanced player at that point. But yeah, that I got into music ministry and probably 12, 13 years old at another church here in Houston. And it just kind of evolved from there, where like people were, you know, asking me to come be their worship leader and that type of thing. And so, but at that point I was like super sold out for God and was like, oh man, I got to be this worship guy. And, you know, I'd looked up to all the worship leaders, you know, and all these other Christian artists. And I was like, that's what I want to be. I want to be this Christian artist. And at that point I was already kind of sold at the idea that I was like this soldier for God and I needed to use my talents, you know, accordingly.
Earlier you were saying something about the lady in your school talking about how you were anointed and all that. Was that anything to do with that?
I think so. I mean, you know,
and let me just explain. I'm sorry if I'm, because some of the stuff you said, like anointed and revival, some people may not understand. So like anointing, when you have the anointing of the Holy Spirit, like there's like, how do you, like there's something special or unique about you that God has an anointing on your life. So there's something like special on you. I think that's the best way to describe it. I mean, you can elaborate a little if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the idea of like prophet or evangelist, you know, these other words. It's like you have the ability, like almost like God has this special touch on your life, and he's going to use you in miraculous ways to reach people. And, you know, that's the whole idea of anointing, where like you know, you sing and people are like, they feel God or something like that. And it's not just music. It can be, you know, pastors or, you know, whatever, you know, some people are anointed dancers or whatever people would say. But yeah, I think she had something to do with that, but also people. I mean, honestly, my mom wasn't even supposed to have kids. They told my mom before I was, you know, before me and my brothers and my sister were born, you'll never have kids. And then here comes my sister, and then here comes my brother Nathan, and then here came me. And I had evangelists and prophets prophesy over me when I was a little bitty baby. And they were like, he's going to lead masses of people and he's special and all this stuff. And then I was a little older and would go down to the altar and have another pastor would be like, man, you're anointed. You're going to, and this was before I was even really doing music. And there were other times when I was, you know, late teens, I guess. And I was leading worship at like some little, a sidewalk, what do they call it? Sidewalk church or a shopping center church. And I would get up and lead worship, and there was 20 people in there. And I'd get up and I'd get done singing, and I'd go put my guitar down, and the pastor would say, "Hey, Jon, come back up here." And I'm like, "Okay." And I grab my guitar. He's like, No, don't grab your guitar. Just come up here and stand up here. And I was like, okay. So I just stood up there, and he said, "I want everyone to take a look at this young man." And he said, this young man has the fire of God in him, and he doesn't even know it. So, I mean, I heard those types of things all the time. I mean, I had somebody at Chick-fil-A. I was talking to a friend of mine at Chick-fil-A, and this other lady, I guess across from us, overheard us talking about calling and God and music and all this stuff. And I was telling my friend, I'm just so lost. I don't know what to do with my life. And I don't know if it's music and Christianity, and I don't know what. And I'm walking out, she grabs my arm and she says, I just prayed for you, and God told me to tell you that you already know what you're supposed to be doing. You're just running, or something like that, you know? So anyway, I've had a bunch of that kind of synergistic stuff around the idea of the word anointing. But yeah.
Sorry, I just have a question real quick. Did that excite you, or did that scare you, hearing that kind of stuff?
I mean, you know, at those points, you know, at that point in my life, I was still very spiritual, I guess. I mean, I don't know if the word spiritual is the right word, but I was still kind of more connected to the idea of God's going to use me, you know? And I think it didn't scare me. It just kind of like reaffirmed and kind of made me emotional, because I was like, whoa, dude, like, you know, that's God. You know, at the time I was like, that's totally God. I mean, in hindsight, I'm like, well, why is he using other people? Why are you using other people to talk to me? You know, like, why can't you just talk to me? You know?
Hmm.
But yeah, it didn't scare me. It just kind of reaffirmed at that time where I was like, oh wow, like these other people see it. These random people that don't even know me see it. So that's kind of interesting.
Mhm. For sure. When you started playing, this may be jumping a little bit ahead, but you did have a band that, and you would play kind of like around town and stuff. You would be playing covers and everything.
The idea of a Christian artist, let alone a Christian, going in a secular world and playing secular music at a secular establishment was like the worst thing ever, to a lot of legalistic Christians. And the keyboard warriors of 2022 would definitely have a lot to say if, Chris Tomlin or some major artist was to go and cover some song, that's not Christian.
That's so crazy, because if you just sing a song that's non-Christian, then do people in the Christian community just think you aren't being Christian-like? Like that's not okay to do that?
Yeah, I mean, people are always going to talk, good or bad. I mean, you could be the best pastor in the world and never do anything bad, and there's going to be something to say
That's just
about
so
you.
weird. Yeah. I mean, that's just so weird to me. I mean, I understand what you're saying, because the way that we grew up, we couldn't listen to anything but Christian music.
Exactly.
Obviously getting out of that and everything, my world and view is totally different now. To me, music is music. Do I think there's good Christian songs? Of course I do. There's bands that I listen to, not rarely, because I think a lot of Christian artists, suck. but there are some Christian artists that are good and that have good music. But for a Christian, I think that's so petty for a Christian artist to sing a cover song of like, what if he was singing like of Josh Brolin or something, or like, something that's like, and you want to be so petty about something. That's why I start to get irritated with Christianity and everything. People,
I think,
I don't mean to go on a rant. I was just like,
I think it's gotten a lot better. I think, probably the 90s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, it was more like, very strict, and I remember growing up, I was really into rock music. I mean, there was bands like Disturbed and Korn and Seven Dust and Mudvayne and all these other bands that Creed. I mean, Creed was like, oh,
Creed was just like awesome, because they were like half, I think, of the world, but half Christian, right?
Yeah,
it was like, Scott Stapp, oh, he's Christian. But
I was a huge Creed fan, and I remember it was interesting. I remember when I first became like a guitar player, I was like, oh, I can actually play. I remember my dad, I think at the time, had bought me a cassette tape of Bush, the band Bush, 16 Stone, or one of these, a Razor Blade Suitcase, one of those records. I can't remember the name of it. And I started learning it. I played it by ear. And that's kind of how I learned how to play guitar, was I just taught myself. And this is before YouTube and internet and all that. I just literally could hear the strings and play it. And that's how I learned. But I learned it doing a secular song, and my mom was okay with it at the time. But I remember when I started getting into like the heavy rock stuff, she wasn't okay with that. I mean, there was days she literally cut up my CDs and broke them and all that kind of stuff, and I'd hide them. But back to the idea of secular music. I hate to keep doing that, but there was definitely a lot of judgment around music. I mean, do you remember? I don't know if you remember movies even. I mean, the Gargoyles movies and all those movies where it's like, Disney's got all this stuff in it. And sure, I've seen some stuff where there's definitely some stuff going on, but so Christianity and any religion really, but mainly Christianity, it's like this bubble, right? And anything on the inside's okay, but anything on the outside, it's like, whoa, that's too far. He's singing about love. He's singing about, this or things he's gone through. But in reality, there's a lot of real messed up stuff going on inside this little bubble. But back to what you said, what you asked, I had people coming up to me at bars and restaurants And keep in mind, I didn't start doing that stuff until after high school. I did play bars in middle school and high school, but it was original music. It was rock music, and it wasn't Christian. It was very heavy and dark, but when I started playing cover shows as like a job, as a business, I played all types of music: country, rock, pop, hip hop, anything. And I didn't really get any flack or whatever word you want to use from people, that I was playing in the world. But I did get people come up from time to time that were like, I can tell you're a Christian or whatever, maybe because of a song choice or something like that I sung. But I wasn't, I honestly, when I went, because I went to private school, public school for 4 years, and then back to private school. And there were some incidences that happened in between those years with my family and my sister that really made me question Christianity. I was like, well, wait a second, we're in the bubble. We're in this little safety area. Nothing bad's going to happen. And some stuff happened to my sister that was like, whoa, this is, how did that happen? We're this perfect little Christian house and Christian family. And that happened. And it really kind of made me just turn away from all of it. Where I was like, I don't even want nothing to do with that. I got this God, I got these people, these grown adults telling me I'm going to get my head cut off and I'm going to get stuck on, I'm going to get stuck here on earth and deal with the tribulations and all this fear. I mean, I was terrified. And so at that point, I'd already kind of, I don't know, I just kind of got distant from that whole idea of like, I'm going to be this evangelist or soldier for God. I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. And that's why I started doing the rock stuff and started playing cover shows. But yeah, I was never really eager to like save souls, where I'm like, let me go talk to this table and try to convince them about Christianity,
Yeah. I mean, I remember meeting you. You had been playing, it was either Loja or Blue at the time, I believe. You would play there.
Loja,
and I came up to you and we were talking, and you started talking about church, or you were talking about you had played at church or something. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Like, I used to go to church, and we kind of just, from there. But I just thought it was so interesting. This guy like playing in a bar, like, and everything, and then like talking about leading praise and worship on Sunday. But that's cool though. That's like, I feel like that's the way it should be. Like, I feel like God, we can get into all this in just a bit, but I feel like God is not this like such a, you have to be in this tight space and do this or that, you have to sing a Christian song, you have to blah, blah, blah. I just don't God like that whatsoever. So you were leading praise and worship and stuff within different churches. And do you want to go into how you got into the Christian band and traveling? Or is there a few things before that had happened?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is from like 19 to like 20, 28, 29, I was playing 4 nights a week, and doing a lot. I was trying to open a coffee shop, and I had this like, creative agency where I shot commercials and music videos. I was always hustling, buying cars, flipping cars, doing all that kind of stuff. At one point when I was 21, I moved to Nashville and thought I was going to be a star. My biological father.
Sorry, didn't you try out for The Voice or something?
Oh, I did American Idol 4 times. The 4th time I went, my sister and I made it through like the next round, and then she didn't make it. I made it to the next round. And then I got like, they were like, yeah, great try. And then I did The Voice 2 years in a row. And the first year they were blown away. They were like, dude, you're on. It never happened. They never called me. I did the whole interview thing and everything. Totally thought I was going to be on the show, and they never called. And then I tried that again a couple of years later. But I did move to Nashville when I was 21, pursuing this career as an artist. And as a solo artist. And I got there and it was an amazing opportunity and time to just go, you know, you're young, but it just didn't work out. Moved back home. When I moved back home, I got a big church in the Woodlands contacted me to come sing and kind of be their one of the worship guys. And that was kind of short-lived. It wasn't what I thought it was. You know, I was looking for like Christianity and I wouldn't say Christianity, but like fellowship and, you know, like, oh, you're part of this ministry. And there was no ministry. It was literally like a production. And then from there, I was like, I'm done with church. I don't want to do church anymore. I just want to kind of be an artist and that's it. And this church out in Clear Lake contacted me through a mutual friend and said, hey, we're looking for a guy. And I spent like 5 years or so helping build that church. Mm-hmm. Did that for a long time. We started in a little spaghetti shop and, you know, built that thing. And, but that's kind of how I got started in like ministry in that capacity. From there, I was playing 4 nights a week, cover shows, private events, and leading worship on Sunday morning. I was running myself into the ground. I mean, I was going to church with 0 sleep. I mean, sometimes no sleep at all, maybe an hour, and I would have to pack all my stuff up, drive an hour all the way to Clear Lake, set it all up, set the lights and PA and all that other stuff, lead worship, manage the band, help the pastor, do all that stuff. I was burning myself out. So I quit. A couple months later, went to another church in Clear Lake, played there for a little while. And then how I got into the band I was in, I had a YouTube video that I posted and somebody at this label saw it and said, hey, I think you're a great fit for this band. Joined the band, and that was an interesting time. And that's kind of what was kind of, you know, the nail in the coffin, if you will, or kind of the start, I guess, of this idea of what do I actually believe and what am I doing this for and all these other things. I don't know how much further you want me to go into that, but.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind, well, I don't know if I should say too much about this. I can cut this out if I need to, but they're kind of a well-known Christian band, I guess. I mean, I'm not going to say names or anything, but yeah, I mean, if you kind of maybe want to go into a little of that and then kind of some of the health stuff that started going on and like what made you ultimately kind of get out of it all.
Yeah. So I joined this band in like I think it was 2017, joined the band. We put a song out. It did okay on radio. And you know, keep in mind, this isn't like, you know, not the biggest band in the world, but not the smallest. And we, you know, the band had already had a little bit of success prior to me coming in. And then for me, it was a huge deal because it's like a major label deal. You know, I'm just like, man, this is incredible. And at the time, let me back up. 2016, I'm laying on my couch watching Mike Tyson, this like Mike Tyson documentary on Netflix. And I just feel super burned out, tired. I'm done with music. I don't want to do it anymore. And there's this documentary on Netflix and Mike Tyson's like fighting Lennox Lewis or somebody. And he got beat up and he lost. And the sports commentator came up and said, Mike, how did you lose, man? You're Mike Tyson and blah, blah, blah. And he said, I just don't have the fight in me anymore, is what he said. And for me, that's how I felt. I mean, I was like, I'm done with music, done with ministry. I'm done with life. I'm just done. And 2 weeks later, I got an email from the label. And I totally thought this was like a God thing. I was like, man, this is a God thing, man. This is crazy. Joined the band, put a song out. And it just didn't go how I thought it was going to go. I didn't feel connected to the band. I didn't feel like taken serious. I didn't feel a part of it. I didn't feel like it was ministry. I felt like I was just like a tool that they used until the tool broke. And it wasn't the best situation. honestly. I'm like that go-getter type guy that, you know, like I said before, kind of gets things done. And I've always been a leader, and I've always been a front man and all those other things. And this was kind of like a dance monkey, you know, do your thing, and then be quiet when you don't, you know, you're not needed or whatever. And yeah, it wasn't very healthy. And there was a lot of things that happened, like Houston got flooded in between, and my grandmother was dying of cancer and she ended up passing away. And a ton of these really big, heavy things happened in between all this time that I was in the band. But the biggest thing that happened was the house I was staying at in Nashville was one of the singers, and his son and dog used to play in the backyard. And the kid would come inside and he'd have ticks all over him. You know, the dog would have ticks on him. And when I'd fly into town to stay, to go on tour or whatever, I would stay in that little boy's room. And one day, in 2018, I remember waking up and there being like a tick in the bed, you know. I had never really seen one before, but I saw it and it looked like it was dead. It wasn't moving. It just looked like a fat tick, you know? And I didn't think nothing of it. I remember throwing it away or something. I don't remember. That was such a long time ago, and my brain doesn't work as well as it used to. But shortly after that, maybe a day or a week, I don't remember the time frame, I had this really soft spot on my head. I took some pictures of it, and I just thought it was ingrown hair. I'm a bald guy, so I just thought, it's ingrown hair or something. And about a month later, I couldn't walk. Maybe weeks. I mean, I just couldn't walk. I couldn't breathe. I started feeling like super out of it, like really messed up. And I remember kind of just like started having like, I don't know, these episodes of like, you know, like I couldn't get enough air. And there was one night in particular, this was November 31st, 2018. I'm laying in bed, I'm about to fall asleep, and it felt like somebody took a stun gun and zapped my heart. And so anyway, enough about the details, but I ended up getting very, very sick, didn't know what was wrong with me. And I would communicate to the band, because I still lived in Houston, kind of traveling back and forth. I would communicate to the band, like, hey guys, something's really wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. And I was pretty much told, well, you need to get on some kind of pills because we've got shows to play, you know. And I didn't really know how to take that, but you know, at the time I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just know that I ended up in the hospital. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I ended up in the hospital in November of 2018. They couldn't tell me what was wrong. They just told me my blood pressure was through the roof and I had anxiety. And I was terrified. You know, my dad has a bunch of heart problems, and I'm thinking I've got something wrong with my heart. And then my symptoms just got worse and worse: panic attacks, anxiety, jaw pain, arm pain down my left side. My hand was burning, just all these crazy symptoms. And I just had no idea what it was. And I just got worse and worse and worse. And I thought maybe I just had a mental health, you know, like a mental breakdown. Started seeing a therapist, told the band I need some time off, and took a little bit of time off. And fast forward to, I ended up quitting the band in 2019, mid 2019, because I just knew it was probably the right thing for me to do. Started seeing this therapist, and she just said, hey, you know, like, I think the band is something that's really bad for you, and I think you need to leave it and step away. And at the time it was really hard, because I'm like, man, I spent 20 years of my life pursuing this thing, you know, like, I'm just going to let go of this. And at the time I had a song on the radio, top, it was like a #2 song on Christian radio. The band was doing really well, you know, getting asked to play here and there. And I unfortunately couldn't function. You know, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't I couldn't do anything. I mean, I was having nocturnal panic attacks every single night. You know, wake up 4 a.m, feeling like Freddy Krueger or somebody's after you, and just all this craziness, man. It was so wild. And I had, the sad part is I had no idea what was wrong. I'd seen all these doctors, nobody could figure it out. And they're just like, take these pills, you have anxiety, blah, blah, blah. Quit the band I was in.
During that time, real quick, during that time when you're like almost about to quit, were they concerned at all for your well-being within the band? Like, we want to make sure you're okay. Just
no, I mean, it's you know, that's why they call it the music business, you know, not music friendship or music church or whatever you want to call it, music ministry.
I get that, but at the same time, if you're supposed to be this Christian group and this Christian, like, you should be a little more concerned with their well-being, with someone's well-being and how they are versus, I mean, I get you need to play shows and everything and you have stuff you need to do, but at the same time, that's just so sad. It's like,
yeah, I have a, you know, in hindsight, I definitely look at it differently. And I can't say nobody ever prayed for me, but nobody ever prayed for me. Like, nobody ever laid hands on me. No band member ever said.
Within that group or just in general?
In general or specifically in that group. Wow. So management would call me and be like, they would say, hey man, you know, just checking on you, seeing when you were coming back, you know, or, you know, when are you coming back? That's kind of was like the main thing. When are you coming back?
Like, it's just so interesting to hear on the aspect of this side of everything, especially when it comes to like Christian world and Christian music, because and within the Christian community, people have such a high standard just of everything in general. But and then you like hear, oh, it's the Christian, oh, they're this and they love God and blah, 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 you know?
Yeah.
And then the reality is management, I'm sure, just wants to sell shows out, just wants to sell records, just wants to sell songs, whatever it may be. They're like any other industry wanting to make money. It's not like we want to save souls here or something. I wouldn't think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, you know, I can't say the heart behind every person that I ever, you know, worked with in that industry, but this is an example of what I experienced. At the time I'm experiencing all these health problems, I took some time off from the band and I was like, I got a text message like, hey, we're flying to Amsterdam, you know, playing a couple shows overseas. Do you want to do it? And I was like, man, that'd be fun. And at the time I was like, sure, you know, let's go for it. You know, let's see if I can manage or whatever. Flew all the way to Amsterdam, and on this big old plane, I was like, I made a really bad decision. Cause I mean, I was dying. I mean, I was not okay, but I'm that type of guy. I'm like, let's go, hit me with it. Mm-hmm. Flew all the way out there. We played 2 shows. We played 1 show in Austria, and then we played a show in Amsterdam. And the show in Amsterdam is like the biggest show of my life. Never been there before. It's like 30,000 people or something crazy. It's like this huge broadcasted show, and I am blacking out on stage, and I'm the front man of this band for the most part. I mean, and I'm blacking out live in front of all these people. And there's a video on YouTube, and I'm looking over at the other singers, like telling them like, yo, you're gonna have to sing. And I remember walking through the airport either before or after that show, and I'm hunched over my luggage looking at one of the members, and I was like, bro, I'm not okay. Something's really wrong with me. And he looked at me, he's like, well, dude, you need to get on some kind of pills. You know, you need to get on some kind of pills, dude. Like, we got stuff to do, blah, 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 you know? And that was kind of, you know, that's kind of how I was, you know, I'm not the woe is me type. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, they hurt my feelings. At the same time, it's like, dude, I mean, what is this? Is this ministry? Am I just like a little puppet? You know, I'm like, if you were my like friend and you were my bandmate and you were this guy that I pulled away from your life, that you had in another state, I would make sure you're taken care of. And it was hard. I legit thought I was going to die. Like I was in Amsterdam thinking I was going to die. And there's more to that story, but that's kind of how that happened. And I didn't really feel supported by label management or anybody. I just didn't. And that's honestly, to kind of segue into ministry stuff, that's kind of how I felt my whole life. I felt like I've been exploited. I felt like I've been used for my talent. I've been, you know, pretty much by every church. I don't say every church, but pretty much every church is, they look at me, they think, how can we use him? They put me on stage, I sing songs, I play guitar, and I do my little thing. And the second I'm no good, or the second that I'm unhappy, or whatever else, they're done. They find somebody else. And that's pretty much what's happened to me, you know, almost my whole life. And that's why, honestly, this whole thing with the band was kind of why I was just like, okay, something here isn't right. And I just don't want to be a part of this anymore. If this is what's going to be, I'm just going to be used and nobody's going to take care of me. I've been battling, I didn't finish talking about that, but I've been battling Lyme disease now for 4 years.
How did you find out it was that?
So I had been sick for about 2 years, didn't know what was wrong, and was just really, really sick. I mean, I was bedridden pretty much. Symptoms were all over the place, heart attack, stroke. I mean, any kind of symptom you can think of that has to do with those two things, all these neurological problems. A lot of this stuff I still battle. In fact, as we talk right now, I'm having a hard time. But I found out because I had several people suggest, hey, this sounds like Lyme disease, you know? And I went and got tested in 2020 for Lyme through like your little generic testing places. And both of these different tests were negative. So I put it on the shelf, and then somebody else said, dude, that's Lyme disease. And I'm like, all right, well, I've already been tested. And so about a year ago now, I was on Google and just typing in all the symptoms I had, and all these people were like, Lyme disease, Lyme disease, Lyme disease. Because my symptoms weren't like your telltale signs of Lyme. I didn't have like a rash or any of those other things that these people talk about. I found out because I finally found a doctor who knew how to test for it, and he tested for it. And they had to send my blood work off to France. And after 6 weeks of waiting, I got an actual diagnosis of Lyme disease. And it's been a nightmare. I mean, it's literally a living nightmare dealing with this stuff.
I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry. And it took how long to actually find out? Like a few years?
Almost
right?
3 years. Almost 3 years. Yeah.
And just to not know. I mean, that's probably the most frustrating part, just to not know what was going on.
Yeah. It's not only frustrating to not know what's going on, but to also kind of feel like, oh, sorry to hear that. We'll be praying for you. You know, it's like I mean, it really makes you question a lot of things, you know. I mean, you're invincible until you're not, you know what I mean? Like when you grow up, you think, oh, nothing will ever happen to me. And for the most part, I'm a healthy guy. I mean, I never get sick really and all that kind of stuff. But this, I mean, this is probably the worst, you know, one of the worst diseases on the planet, because there's literally no cure. There's no cure for this. And it's not identified as an actual disease by the CDC. It's not, they don't believe it's an actual chronic illness. It's very expensive. I mean, it's like $750 to go talk to a Lyme doctor, and they don't even take insurance. And there's a lot to that, but Anyway.
Wow. Yeah. So it's just like as of right now, it's just kind of maintaining it, right?
Yeah, it's a bit like cancer in the sense of like the idea is to treat it and try to get it into remission, you know. Here's a quick example of how primitive and smart this bug is. I have multiple infections. I have Bartonella, which is like cat scratch fever. You probably heard of that. And I have Borrelia, which is the Lyme disease. And these bugs are so smart that anytime an antibody will come and try to get it, it will encapsulate itself into a cocoon on a cellular level so that nothing can get to it. It's the craziest thing.
Crazy.
But I took medication for 6 months, roughly $1,000 a month for like 6 months to try to get Bartonella into remission.
Mm-hmm.
After 6 months, I took another test that takes 6 weeks to get back, and it was still there.
Yeah.
6 months. I'm talking about like hydroxychloroquine,
yeah,
zithromycin, doxycycline. I mean, I took rifampin. I took all kinds of medication, tons and tons of medication. I mean, I took like 40 pills a day, and it was still there. So that's kind of what I'm up against. But in between all that, I didn't feel the support, from the community that I've spent 20 plus years, 30 years of my life building, and that's been really hard. And that's kind of, another reason why I've just kind of questioned all that stuff,
For sure. I could totally understand that. I mean, after all this time of dedicating yourself to the church and to the community and to believing in Jesus and God and all that stuff, and going, well, just pray, that's what every Christian wants to say. Just pray.
Pray
God
harder.
will heal you.
Pray harder. That's what
right. You're
pray
not
harder.
Hard enough. Like, God will heal you. Mother effer. You know what? I'm in a lot of pain right now. I don't really want to be praying.
Yeah.
No, look, I have nothing against Christianity or anything. People who watch my channel know that I'm a Christian. I do believe in God, but my beliefs are like, I'm not so hardcore Christian that like what I was saying earlier, where like my beliefs are just so hardcore. And I don't think that every time telling someone, well, just pray it out, that's sorry. No, some people just don't want to hear that. They're so over it. And I'm sure you've been just so over it, past it. It just gets to the point where you're like, well, I don't know what else to do here.
Yeah. When luckily, a lot of the world is healthy. You know what I mean? Not everyone's dealing with cancer or chronic illness. When you start dealing with an illness that takes over your brain, I have what's called neuroborreliosis and neurobartonella. Both of these have crossed into my blood-brain barrier and into my brain. So both of these have infected my brain. When you're dealing with something you deal with that you literally see with your eyes 24 hours a day, you hear with your ears 24 hours a day, you feel in your body 24 hours a day, it's 24-hour torture all day long. And I can't tell you how many times, especially when it was real bad in 2019 and 2020, I can't tell you how many times I would lay in bed, listen to worship music, and just say, God, I need you, man. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I need help. I'm dying. Where are you at? And I would have friends, and other people, I'm praying for you, or just pray harder, and when I would hear that whole idea of pray harder, I envisioned this like bearded guy on a cloud that's like looking down at John and just say, oh, you're almost there. The prayer meter is almost to 100%. If you just pray a little harder, I'll do it for you,
Yeah.
And that's such a confusing thing to me, now that I'm older, I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense. Especially, I see people on Facebook, like somebody's dying or prayers for Aurora or whatever it is. I mean, prayers for Uvalde and all these things that are happening all over the world. It's like, it's so confusing. The idea of prayer is so confusing to me now. And specifically because of my health stuff, it's like, it's confusing. And then when the prayer doesn't happen, you've got all these people are like, well, it's God's timing. It's in God's timing that it'll happen. And if it's for him, if it's supposed to happen, it'll happen. And that's the last thing I'll say is this. It's like, Jon, you're anointed. You're going to lead the masses. And you made it. You got songs on the radio. You're traveling the world. You're doing all these things. And then what happened? I got this little bug that bit my scalp, took over the last 4 years of my life. And I look at that and I'm like, if I was so anointed and I was destined for all these things for God, then why did this happen to me? Why am I dealing with this illness specifically? Like, okay, break my arm or something, it caused me to, maybe I got to sit down for a minute, but to deal with something like this, it made me question so much, health, the health stuff made me question so much of Christianity and that whole thing.
So what is your beliefs now? Do you believe in God, consider yourself still Christian, or you're just in the process of trying to figure that all out?
My mom and I are really close. I called her a couple months ago, and my mom, not only is she my biggest fan, she's just an amazing woman. And I mean, I talk to her pretty much every other day or every day. And I confessed to her that I don't know anymore if I believe in Christianity, and I think I even said something like, I don't know if I ever really did. I think I was kind of like forced into that belief system culturally because that's what my family did. And I think so many people are forced culturally into these beliefs. I told my mom, hey, look, I don't know if I believe in that anymore. There's all these questions I have, and I feel hurt by a lot of people. And the first reaction, of course, to every Christian is, well, that's people. Those are people. And I'm like, yeah, but ask and you shall receive. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door will be open.
Yeah.
I've been knocking. I've been asking. I mean, give me something, dude. Like this is the hardest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I would not wish it on my worst enemy. I think a lot of people with chronic illness are suicidal. A lot of people with Lyme disease don't want to be alive anymore because it just takes over your entire body. Where I'm at belief-wise is I look at my hands and I look at my eyes and my face and my body, and there's no way to look at how we're made and believe there is no creator. It's impossible. I'm a photographer, and I create visuals and all those types of things. And I look at your eyes, they're like a little camera, your brain is like a hard drive with all your memory and your processing. Your ears, the fact that they're like little microphones, they can hear things. Your heart is a little machine, a lot of people don't know, there's like this little electric diode that keeps your heart going. Mm-hmm. Your body's amazing. Your lungs are your little, where you get your air. I mean, your body's so intricate. And so it's so hard for me to not believe in God. I 100% believe in a creator, a God. I don't know anymore. I haven't structured it, or I haven't thought through it 100%. And a lot of this has to do with my health. I have such a hard time thinking and processing emotions and thoughts and all these other things. But anything that has to do with structured religion, whether it's Catholicism, Christianity, whatever it is, even yoga, disgusts me. Anything that has to do with structured anything where there's a leader involved that's trying to tell us how it's supposed to go, I don't like it anymore. Don't want any part of it. I don't know how dark this sounds, but you know, I've already thought of a rebuttal to like the Christian that's like, well, what if the rapture happens? Or what if you die and go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus anymore? And I said, and my mom, and I told my mom this as well, I said, if the God in heaven, the God that people talk about, the God that I was taught my entire life, this Jesus guy, sends me to hell, knowing what I've experienced as a child in the private school I was in, knowing what I've experienced in the church, knowing what I've experienced in my health, sends me to hell, well, let's go. Because at this point in my life, I've done 37 years of praying and 37 years of asking questions and 37 years of ministry and 37 years of trying to get answers and trying to understand. And I honestly look back on Christianity and I think to myself, the only thing I can really say I got from it was morals and values. I feel like I spent my entire life chasing this perfection and don't sin and you're going to go to hell. And, you know, I now I look back on it and I don't want any part of it, you know, but I do still pray, you know. I mean, there's definitely at nighttime, I'll lay in my bed and I'll just say, God, I want to know the truth. I want to know that you're the real God. I want to know that this is real. If this Jesus story and this Christianity in this book is so real, I want to know it. Hit me with it, whatever that looks like. And that's just where I'm at. I'm being as vulnerable as I can be. I think we need that more in the church. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, thank you for being so honest and open. You know, a lot of Christian people or whatever, they don't really want to get to the place where they actually want to admit some of this stuff. Like, I'm having doubts, I'm going through these concepts in my head, and I really don't understand what is going on. And the reality of what you're going through is very real and very present and very, like, it's an everyday struggle. I can't even imagine what you're going through, you know? And for someone else to just sit there and judge or whatever, like, you know, and here's the other thing, what I've told some of my friends and everything, I honestly, in my heart of hearts, do not believe that God is that kind of God that is like, you have to be so structured in this religion. Religion is a man-made thing. It really is. Why do we have so many different types of religion? Baptist, whatever it is, like, there's just so many different types of religion and sects and going off of these different sects and everything. And it just, it's so man-made. And when the reality is, it's supposed to be about you and a connection with God. That's all it's supposed to be about, not about everybody else and everybody else judging you. Like, when you get to heaven, who's going to judge you? God, not the person next to you or your pastor even. Like, it's going to be God, you and God. And to me, I do not see God as this vicious God who's going to condemn you to hell. I see him as a loving God who loves his children, and we go through shit in our lives and stuff happens and we don't always have the answers. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here right now, everything you're saying, you're so vulnerable. I feel like, I just feel horrible. I just want to, like, hug you. You know, all I will say is, I think that you have so much more to offer this world, whether it's music, whether it's not music. I mean, like I said at the beginning, you are very talented. And I'm not even talking within, like, the Christian community, like, you have to, like, do all this stuff within that. And just in a general basis, you are very talented. And I think you have so much more to offer this world. And I just, you know, to see that you were so, it just makes me so sad that you were, you know, just so down and just so all these, going through all this pain and all these emotions and everything. And I feel like a real Christian who like really believes in God, just like show a little grace to people. Like,
Yeah.
a little grace, offer a little grace, a little understanding. Until you have been in someone else's shoes, you don't know what they're truly going through or experiencing.
Just, you know, I think that these conversations are much needed and are, I mean, one of the only reasons why I even agreed to do this is like, I feel like this is such a helpful tool for so many people, because I think there's so many people that deal with this same thing, but they're so scared of what people will think, or they're scared that, you know, they're going to find out some real answers. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong. Let me say this very clearly. I want to know if I haven't explored it enough for myself to really say I don't believe in Jesus anymore or whatever. I say I think I don't. You know, I don't know. I mean, there's tons of evidence to say that Jesus was a real person and all these other things. My struggle is just the idea of not feeling that connection or feeling the conviction that that's true anymore, you know, and all the things that have happened, you know, and trust me, there are many other people with way worse situations than me. I mean, I get it. There's people that have been through really bad things in their childhood and all that kind of stuff. And, but this is what I'm going through. This is what I've experienced, and all I can do is, you know, the best I can with what I have. And right now, I mean, I'm just on this journey to try to figure it out. And I think, like you said, having grace and mercy and all that is definitely key to walking through this stuff, because, you know, the things we go through are what make us who we are. And somebody through my story is going to get, you know, something from it and be impacted from it. And, you know, that's the best I can do, you know.
For sure. 100%. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Now it's kind of gotten dark out, so all I can see is your face.
My little face.
Your face, and then it's like black. It kind of looks like you're just a head, like
I'm like floating, and yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I cannot wait to get this out and everything. I think, just like you said, we need to have more conversations like this that are just real and honest. I mean, we're not perfect people here. We all go through things. We all deal with horrible things in life. We have our ups and downs and everything. And just to be honest and talk about it, not just act like we have everything together all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? But yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and end here. Just want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. I hope you had a good time listening, and I will be having some more episodes come out within the next couple months. Hope everyone has a good evening.